Okay, so tonight I want to talk about the nervous system and how the nervous system actually functions, and then what different stressors, whether they be physical and or emotional stressors, can affect the nervous system. And we'll talk a little bit about the vagus nervous system as well tonight. Okay. Is that going to work in wise? There we go. Okay. So I already talked about this a little bit, so I'm just going to skip this learning objective and then we'll talk about the nervous system. So the nervous system acts as the body's central control center, and it's our communication network. So if we think of like a big electrical cord that comes in and it has tons of wires and they're all different coded in colors, and it's got a coating around the top. That's kind of what our nervous system looks like. We have all these fibers that come out of the nervous system, and they
Are
enable us
those
to
mine?
think and move and
Just
feel
those
and
two?
react to all
So
of our
cute. Yeah, I
surroundings.
know.
Can you
No, I
guys
didn't
just
mean it
mute
like
yourself,
that.
please, if you're
Is
talking in the
the rest of
background?
them on there?
That's
Oh.
one of them.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I'm just
Sorry.
asking. No, I didn't know if these were the other ones or not. Because you separate.
There we go. Okay. I think I got that one. I'm just going to go back and share again. Here we go. You'll hear my grandkiddos in the background here too. They're getting ready to head out for tonight. And where did my screen just go? All right, there we go. Can you guys see my screen still?
Yes.
Okay, so I just need to shrink you. Okay, perfect. There we go. All right. So as I was saying, the nervous system affects every single thing that we do. So without a healthy nervous system, our signals get crossed, and that's where we can start to get all kinds of wonky symptoms that we'll talk about in a little bit here. But it is the major thing that controls all of that for us. So in the central nervous system, that starts with the brain. And we all know the brain is the boss of the nervous system. It controls everything we do, like thinking, feeling, moving. It handles all of our processes, all of the information from all of our senses. And every part of the brain has a different controller command center. And so it controls different things. It's not like the whole brain controls every single thing that we do. Each part of the brain has a unique function in what it's supposed to be controlling. So if one part of the brain is damaged, but the other part is not, then that's why you see the symptoms that you do. Or sometimes if there's a small area in the brain, like if you have a little hole in the prefrontal cortex, the body gets smart and it'll kind of work its way around that hole to try to heal that portion. And it'll try to find a new highway, basically, so that it can still function, even though it may not function exactly perfectly before that divot was there. It's going to continue to try to work its way around like that. And then we have the spinal cord that is connected to the brain. And this is like the highway that connects the brain to the rest of the body. So the brain sends a signal through the spinal cord down into the body. And then this sends messages back up between the brain and the body and different parts of the brain. So for instance, if I'm cold, my body and my hands are cold, it's going to send that message back up to the brain to tell the brain that I'm cold, and it wants to send a new signal down to tell my body to warm up my hands. So that's kind of a oversimplified manner of how it works, but you guys get the picture there. Then we have the peripheral nervous system. And this is where the nerves act like little wires that connect to the brain and the spinal cord to the rest of the body. And they also carry messages to and from the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the somatic nervous system. And this part controls all our voluntary movement, like walking, picking up a pencil, bending over, typing, that kind of thing. And then the autonomic nervous system, this part controls our involuntary actions. So our heartbeat, our digestion, all of the things that happen in our body that we don't tend to think about. We don't have to think about our heart moving. We don't have to think about breathing. Our body just does that all on its own. That's the autonomic nervous system. And then we have the different inputs. So we have a sensory input where the nervous system gathers information from our senses. So sight, sound, taste, smell, the typical five senses. And that then sends that signal to the brain. So when there's a problem, like with COVID, where we damage the nerves in the nose, which we call the olfactory nervous system, that disrupted it. So if you lost your sense of smell and then you lost your sense of taste, that disrupted that signal back to the brain to tell the brain, hey, I need to taste, I need to smell, I need to do this, I need you to do that. That whole process shut down when COVID happened and damaged those nerves. Some people got that nerve function back, but there are still people today that have never gotten their sense of smell back or their sense of taste back because that part of the nerve was damaged so severely from the virus itself that they may never get that part back. And so when we have these sensory inputs, the brain processes this information and decides what is it going to do about it, right? I see something. Okay. I see something nice. It's a flower. It's beautiful. I'm going to smell it. That's a beautiful smell. Those are all positive things that go to the brain versus, oh, there's a tiger in front of me and he's looking at me. Okay, that's a different signal that's going to come from the eyes to the brain, and it's going to put us into that fight or flight response. So that's how the brain is supposed to be controlling everything that we do. And then when the brain sends these signals to our muscles, to our glands, this makes our body respond, like moving your hand away from something hot. Or on an autonomic thing, we release hormones when we're supposed to, and our body just does whatever it's supposed to do. That's what's actually happening from all of these senses that we have. And then we have these things called neurons, and neurons are the main cells of the nervous system. They carry messages throughout the body, and each neuron has a different structure, and it also has a different responsibility. So, like our dendrites, they receive messages from other neurons. Axons send messages to other neurons or other parts of the body. And then the synapses, this is where there's a tiny gap between neurons where the messages are passed. So it's this very intricate, very deluxe system that we're working on. It's amazing that it doesn't have more problems and more complexities given all the things that have to happen in order for our body to function. But our bodies do this really well unless the neurons get disrupted for some reason. We get a traumatic brain injury, we get an infection that crosses the blood-brain barrier and damages the neurons. There's a trauma. We're really studying a lot these days what trauma, the effect of trauma and what it has on the brain and the neurons and how it's affecting the body, where physically we may not be able to find a reason for the symptoms, but there's a traumatic injury that's happened, not necessarily to the brain, but just trauma in general, like maybe some emotional abuse or PTSD, things like that. And that is now disrupting these neurons as well and causing more problems with the physical symptoms that we're seeing. And so we also have these things called glia cells, and glia cells are our helper cells. They play a really crucial role in supporting and safeguarding our neurons. They supply nutrients, they eliminate waste, and they assist in maintaining the proper function of the neurons as well. And so this whole thing operates with neurons sending message using electrical impulses. They travel along the axon to the synapses. And then at the synaptic site, these messages are turned into chemical signals using neurotransmitters. And neurotransmitters are chemicals that cross the synapses and pass the message on to the next neuron. So our neurotransmitters are things like serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, glutamate, GABA, PEA. These are our neurotransmitters, and each one of them has a very distinct responsibility. So, for instance, if you're high in glutamate in the brain, glutamate is very toxic to the brain. So we call it a neurotoxin. If it's low, then we typically see more gut inflammation and gut issues. And when it's spot on, that's where we want it to be. So in people who are suffering from ALS, it typically has to do with a very high glutamate level. Or if somebody's starting to have issues with Alzheimer's or dementia, one of the things we want to look at is where is their glutamate level at? Because if that glutamate level is high, it's creating a toxic environment in the brain, and that's what's causing some of their symptoms. And if we can get that glutamate level to come down, then their cognitive symptoms improve, and it helps prevent them from having other neurological issues. versus say if somebody is deficient in dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, it's the feel good neurotransmitter. It helps us stay very consistent with our moods. So we're not up and down, up and down, up and down like a bipolar person. But if it's too low, then you see more symptoms related to Parkinson's. So you see that tremor, you see that very stiff look when dopamine is low. And then other neurotransmitters will have different effects on us as well. Like if GABA is low, then we tend to have more anxiety and we have sleep issues. If serotonin is low, our hormones tend to be off more. We don't sleep as well. We tend to be a little more sad. So each neurotransmitter has its very own distinct pattern to it. So in this nervous system, it plays a vital role in all of our actions, and it enables us to engage with the world, maintains our function of organs, it facilitates learning and memory processes, it explores its functions, and it can lead to an improved health and overall well-being as well. So I want to talk a little bit about what chronic stress does on the nervous system. So chronic stress, or a persistent feeling of pressure and overwhelm for overextended periods of time, is what we call chronic stress. Now, this could be a chronic stressor as an emotional thing. Maybe you're dealing with a coworker that's just really difficult. Maybe you have a family member that's difficult. You have a child that's giving you some difficulties. Your parents are aging, or maybe you have a nagging knee injury or a shoulder that's an issue, or you have this chronic infection. All of those kinds of things are considered stressors on the body. The body doesn't know the difference between an emotional stressor or a physical stressor. It also can't tell the difference between a good stress and a bad stress. So you could plan a funeral or you could plan a wedding. The body sees the stressor as exactly the same thing. So for those people, we talk about this a lot in college kids, but adults do it as well. When we're burning the candle at both ends for a long period of time, we're not sleeping well, we're not resting, we're taking care of kids, we're taking care of parents, we're working all the time, we're not getting that good restorative sleep. Body senses that as stress, and then that becomes a big problem over time for us. And it presents itself with a variety of different health issues. We can see cardiovascular issues, we can see a weakened immune system, we can see mental health disorders, we can see weight gain as an issue. Some people will have migraine headaches from this. There's a whole host of symptoms that you'll see related to chronic stress. Oftentimes, you'll hear this coined as chronic fatigue, chronic stress syndrome, or adrenal insufficiency syndrome. That's because as these things go on, it disrupts the hormones. And as the hormones get disrupted, then we have a new set of symptoms that come about as a result of that. So typically this will trigger a fight or flight response, and or a parasympathetic symptom called rest and digest. So again, I'll use the analogy of the tiger. The tiger comes out in front of you. You see the tiger. Your fight response goes up. You flee. You get back to the house. Everything's fine. And you're like, oh, thank God, I can rest now. That's the way we're supposed to have the stress come into our lives. The problem is we typically have stressor after stressor after stressor after stressor. And then we leave work for the day and there's more stress and more stress and more stress. And by the time we get home, there's been no time to relax. There's been no rest or digest period. And it may be only until we're ready to fall asleep that our body's starting to feel like it's relaxing, but it never really had that chance to relax until you're sound asleep. And we need that stress, relax, stress, relax, stress, relax, instead of constantly one or constantly the other. Okay. So the toll of that chronic stress is seen in cortisol levels. And chronic stress will lead to a hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So the HPA axis will become problematic. And what ends up happening is that the parts of the brain that control our hormones, like the hypothalamus and the pituitary, they're the divas of the world, they will have a problem producing the hormones at a rate they're supposed to. And so for women, we'll see estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol be disrupted. For men, we see the same thing, but it's heavier on the testosterone side. For everyone, what ends up happening in that fight or flight is initially that cortisol will come up. It gets you through that fight. And then that cortisol should decline. And then we should be feeling the rest. But when we're constantly in that fight, the body's constantly pumping out cortisol to try to quiet everything down, but it's not doing it efficiently. And that's when we end up having problems. So in the beginning, we'll see symptoms of too much cortisol, where you're constantly feeling revved up, maybe a little anxious. You'll start to see some weight gain around the midsection. You won't sleep as well. But then as the body's been in that stressful time for a longer period of time, the body's going to say, oh, I can't do this anymore. And it stops producing that cortisol. And as that cortisol starts to decline every time you have a stressful event, your body doesn't manage the stress the same way. And then that's when people start to get diagnosed with adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue syndrome, because you're not making enough cortisol to get you through the day like you were supposed to. And sometimes we'll even see people's cortisol be completely flatlined. And that's a big problem too, because then they can't get the energy, their immune system's not working, they're having more weight issues, more dietary issues, and it becomes a vicious cycle then. Okay. So then how does this immune system work with this fight or flight response? Well, cortisol typically suppresses the immune system by reducing lymphocyte production and function. And then it impairs the body's ability to fight infection as a whole. In the rest and digest phase, elevated cortisol can alter gut motility and increase stomach acid, leading to issues like indigestion, heartburn, irritable bowel syndrome. And then we can also see elevated cortisol levels are linked to higher cholesterol, higher triglyceride levels, increasing the risk for heart attack and stroke and heart blockage as well. So some of the things that you can do to help get your body into this rest phase is that deep breathing. We call it box breathing. So you put your hand on your belly and you want to make sure you're breathing in to the count of 4, you hold for the count of 4, and then you exhale to the count of 4, and then hold that for 4 seconds as well. And that breathing like that, that rhythmic breathing can really help to lower that cortisol relatively quickly. It seems like it's a really minuscule thing, but it can work really well. And so people who are in chronic stress, we will try to encourage them to do this type of deep breathing at least a couple of times a day, on your way into the office, at lunchtime, on your way out, and then before bed. It's a really great time. And you don't need to do it for a long period of time, really. You can do just a couple of breaths like this, maybe to the tune of 3 to 5 minutes. And that's really all you need to start reducing that cortisol level. And then there's also an inhale breath way that you can do this too. It's called the 4-7-8 breathing. So when you get good at this and you've expanded your diaphragm, or people who are singers do this quite easily, they can probably start with this one right out of the gate. They inhale for 4, hold for 7, and then exhale for 8. And that just helps bring that cortisol level down even that much faster. And you want to make sure you're always engaging your diaphragm when you're doing this, because that helps to stimulate that vagus nerve. That vagus nerve stimulation is also what's going to help calm things down for you. And then if we talk about the vagus nerve for stress relief, it's a critical component in the parasympathetic nervous system. It influences heart rate, digestion, mood. When people have a lot of gut issues, almost always the vagus nerve is involved. The vagus nerve sits up at the neck area. And so it's definitely connected to that gut. And if we can get the vagus nerve to engage, we can get the gut to calm down a little bit as well. So stimulating this nerve can promote a very calm state and counteract some of that stress response as well. So we'll go into looking at how do we do this easily without having to do a wearable or without having to do a lot of things. So cold exposure is really good. There's a lot of talk about cold plunges right now, going into a cold tub of water, which is really great, but most people can't do it. And it's really a lot of work to do. It's just as easy to splash cold water on your face, put a cold cloth or compress around your neck, especially in the front here. The other thing you can do is just do a cold shower. So either at the beginning or the end of your shower, do like a 30 to 60-second cold shower, as cold as you can tolerate it. Ideally, it's best to do it at the end of the shower versus the beginning. We also live where it's very cold, and it's nice to just have that warm shower at the end. So we tell people do it wherever it feels comfortable for you so that you're just doing it because it'll help reduce that heart rate for you and promote that relaxation.
Progress.
And then vocal exercises are really good as well. Humming is great. Singing or chanting stimulates the muscles connected to the vagus nerve as well. And these activities can lead to increased heart rate variability and that sense of calming. If you've ever had a rough day and you've turned on your favorite song and you just sang to it in the car ride home, you know how much better you feel once you've done that. You've kind of let everything out. And this activity does that same type of thing. And then another really good way of calming that vagus nerve down is gargling. If you gargle, you're engaging the muscles at the back of the throat, which also stimulates the vagus nerve. And regular practice can actually enhance that vagal tone and reduce stress. Some people will talk about your gag reflex, like you need to stimulate the gag reflex. You can do that and it works really well, but I'll tell you, most people, if you're really sensitive to it, you don't want that gag reflex really stimulated like that. But you can do it in a very gentle way with the toothbrush. You can just take your toothbrush and touch the back of your throat to just give you a little bit of that gag reflex. We don't want it to make it feel like you're going to actually vomit. That's a little too strong. And if you have a very sensitive gag reflex like that, it's a good indication that your vagus nerve is shut down or shutting down. It needs to be stimulated, but you want to do it in slow increments so that it's not creating too many problems for you there. So empower your nervous system, embrace that resilience. I want to leave you with this one thought. If there was one small change you could implement today to support your nervous system health, what would that be for you? So it's very hard to implement all of these things. And all of these things are wonderful, but you have to figure out what can I implement in my day to day that works really well. That's not going to feel like just another thing you have to do. Make it simple, make it easy, and make it something that you can do on a regular basis.